200 years ago, a vital mission began. Its scope? To survey every nook and cranny of the coasts of the United States. Its purpose? To ensure the safe passage of people and goods by ship. This ongoing endeavor has its roots in the first days of our nation. At the time, shipwrecks plagued the country. Commerce was jeopardized. Lives were tragically lost. President Thomas Jefferson saw a solution. He established the Survey of the Coast, the nation's first scientific agency. The survey was charged with making up-to-date charts that would ensure the safety of seafarers. Today, Jefferson's mission of precision charting continues, carried out daily by the surveyors of NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. It's a mission that touches every one of us. Our economy and way of life are intertwined with the sea. 1 out of every 2 Americans lives near a coast. 95% of overseas trade enters or leaves the U.S. by ship. From the depths of our harbors to the positions of our peaks, to the movements of our tides and currents, this is the story of pushing the edge of technology to guarantee the secure flow of people and commerce. This is the story of America's surveyors. If only we could see through the water as we do through air, we could know what hazards lurk below. Rocks, debris, and unknown perils make navigation of our waterways treacherous.
And slow head on the engine.
To avoid a shipwreck, we need accurate nautical charts. But to make an accurate chart takes an exacting combination of efforts. Teams must gather a huge amount of data about tides and currents, latitude and longitude, contours of the coastline, and the shape of the sea floor. The better the data, the more precise the chart. Today's surveyors use cutting-edge technology to take their measurements. But 200 years ago, it all began with a simple lead weight at the end of a line. In 1807, the movement of goods and people depended on the sea. There were no railroads, no interstate highways. Ships were key to our economic survival, and the survival of the ship depended on knowing the hazards of each harbor and the nuances of the coastlines, tides, and currents. In 1807, President Thomas Jefferson recognized the need for a survey that would serve the interests of a fledgling nation. At the time, few charts existed of our coastal waters, and the ones that did were very rough and out of date. Jefferson, a surveyor himself, knew that accurate charts would reduce shipwrecks and provide a foundation for the expansion of commerce. Congress agreed with Jefferson and on February 10, 1807, passed the act authorizing what was then called the Survey of the Coast. A grand total of $50,000 was allocated for the task. Several scientists vied for the position of starting the survey, but Ferdinand R. Hassler, an accomplished Swiss scientist and mathematician, earned the honor. Those who knew Hassler called him eccentric, highly sensitive, and absent-minded. a man who made bread at home and came to his laboratory with flour on his coat. Hassler was a stickler for details and emphatic about scientific accuracy. He insisted on the finest surveying tools, which at the time were available only in Europe. He set sail for England in 1811, but the War of 1812 intervened and Hassler was detained abroad as an enemy alien. 4 years later, in 1816, Hassler finally returned to the United States and got to work. He began on Fire Island, just outside of New York Harbor. Hassler's first step was to establish what is called a baseline. A baseline is a line between two permanently marked points. As its name implies, the baseline is the starting point for all other parts of the chart. Hassler's baseline method was so exact that he used a microscope and a strand of spider's silk to verify that the iron bars were aligned perfectly. For the baseline, Hassler moved the survey bar 1,800 times over the course of 45 days to measure a total length of exactly 8.73 miles. But setting the baseline was just the first step. Reference stations like lighthouses were established on land. Then the shoreline was mapped. Multiple water level measurements were recorded to establish time and heights of high and low tides. Finally, the sounding party could begin to do their work, running lines, measuring depths, and fixing the launch's positions at regular intervals.
Ready? Mark.
$23.5?
23.5, aye.
Sand.
Sand, aye.
Numbers on the final chart are adjusted to show depths at mean low tide. The work was repetitive, yet utterly thorough. Hassler's diligence was rewarded when one of his surveyors named Getney found a new deep water channel into New York's port. Hassler spent nearly 20 years completing the chart of New York Harbor, the survey of the coast's first published chart. He died just before its publication in 1845. But his legacy was enormous. Hassler had set the surveying bar at its highest scientific level. As a result, United States nautical charts became some of the best in the world. The mid-1800s were a time of great territorial expansion for the United States. In 1845, Texas joined the Union, to be followed by California in 1848. The new country posed a daunting challenge to the surveyors. Thousands upon thousands of square miles of territory, new international boundaries, and vast new coastlines along the Pacific and the Gulf of Mexico all had to be surveyed. In the 1840s, a constant stream of immigrants crossed the ocean to make a new home in the United States. San Francisco Harbor got its first wharf. New Orleans became the fourth largest port in the world. Steamships increased the speed and volume of maritime commerce. The pressure for new nautical charts for the new territories fell squarely on the shoulders of the survey's second superintendent, Alexander Dallas Bache. The great-grandson of Benjamin Franklin, Bache brought both scientific and political savvy to the job. He built the survey into a scientific powerhouse that harnessed the latest technology to advance the precision of surveying. One of his achievements was to use the brand new invention of the telegraph to improve the accuracy of fixing longitude. Surveyors determined longitude, that is the distance east or west on the globe, by measuring differences in the time a star is seen in place A versus the time it is seen in place B. But traveling with a clock over distances can lead to inaccuracies. Bache recognized that the telegraph could eliminate the need for the clock to travel. In 1846, he conducted an experiment connecting an astronomer in Philadelphia to a clock in Washington, D.C. By having an instantaneous way of marking the time a star was seen in the two cities, Bache determined a remarkably accurate calculation of longitude. Bache's technique was called the American method and was soon emulated worldwide. The endless pursuit of accuracy in surveying had advanced yet again. Bache also set a new standard for tide measurements. Before Bache, measuring tides was primarily done by reading markings on a graduated tide staff in the water and noting the time. It took days of manual recording to get data solid enough to make tide predictions. Bache introduced a new device, an automatic tide gauge that traced the water movement up and down on graph paper. In 1854, one of the new gauges was installed in San Francisco. Though the technology has changed over time, it marked the beginning of continuous tide observations in this one spot. More than 150 years later, water level data is still being gathered here. Just 6 months after the San Francisco tide gauge was installed, a small tsunami wave crossed the Pacific. The tsunami would have gone unnoticed if not for the new tide gauge. Bache looked at the seemingly insignificant data and made a remarkable calculation. He looked at the time the waves hit San Francisco and was able to compute the average depth of the Pacific Ocean. His estimate turned out to be remarkably accurate. But perhaps Bache's most visible achievement is his role in helping establish a new code for U.S. navigation called Red Right Return. This system, still the standard for ports throughout America, places red painted buoys on the right side of a channel when entering a harbor. Despite Bache's success in science and navigation, he was having trouble staffing his survey teams on the West Coast. The California gold rush was drawing many able-bodied men away from less lucrative survey work. At one point, a survey crew even mutinied and threw their commander overboard so that they could join the prospecting frenzy. Bache put out a call. Wanted. Young men willing for 1 year to do any duty, however hard or manual, incident to the survey on the western coast. Answering his call was one of the greatest scientists to ever work for the survey, George Davidson. In 1850, Davidson started at Point Conception near Santa Barbara, California. The surveyors made countless surf landings on the rocky coast in all kinds of weather. Davidson was swamped and tossed overboard frequently. Others paid more dearly, including 6 men who died when their boat overturned in 1867. Still, they persevered. For the next 7 years, they traveled up and down the coast, locating the major headlands, uncovering dangerous shoals, and determining the placement for lighthouses and buoys still in use today. (1871). The country is healing from the divisions of the Civil War. New territories are on the verge of statehood. The surveyors have their own way of bringing the country together. by building a scientifically solid foundation for a new national reference system that determines latitude, longitude, and elevation in the United States. They chose to survey along the 39th parallel, a line of latitude that starts in Cape May, New Jersey, and ends in Point Arena, California. Surveying this transcontinental arc was a massive undertaking. The enterprise took nearly 30 years to complete. The only means of transportation for the heavy survey equipment were horses, mules, and sturdy legs. Teams were sent to different mountaintops. The distances between peaks were tremendous, 190 miles at times. The key to crossing the vastness was sunlight. Using an instrument called a heliotrope, a surveyor on one mountain peak would flash a signal to the main team of observers on another peak. The main team would take at least 34 different readings of the angle to the distant peak.
308.
308.
148.
Then they would average the results in order to improve accuracy.
6.3.
6.3.
From 1871 to 1899, the surveyors covered 2,625 miles. When they were done, charts from the East Coast, Gulf Coast, and West Coast could all be properly aligned on a national grid. Today, these land-based surveyors continue to be responsible for what is now known as the National Spatial Reference System, a 50-state network of highly accurate control points that defines latitude, longitude, and elevation in the United States. This network is the key to our country's infrastructure. Every construction, transportation, and mapping project uses this network as its starting point. For the first 100 years of the history of the surveyors, their work was done as civilians, even at times of war. In the Civil War, the civilian surveyors were in a precarious position. They accompanied Army and Navy units, and because they were not wearing uniforms, could have been considered spies if captured by the enemy. In World War I, Congress remedied the situation. They created a commissioned service, which today is called the NOAA Corps. Being uniformed and commissioned made it easier for Corps members to apply their technical skills for military purposes. During World War I, Corps officers played many roles, from mine laying in the North Sea to navigating troop transport to intelligence gathering. In World War II, the surveyors were again called to serve. Women joined the survey in large numbers, a fact still true today. In Europe and the Pacific, surveyors helped guarantee the safe passage of troops and equipment. Better tide predictions ensured safe troop landings. Fine-tuned positioning improved the accuracy of bombing and artillery missions. Millions of aeronautical and nautical charts were produced. The efforts of the surveyors saved countless Allied and American lives. The 20th century witnessed an explosion in the new technologies used by the surveyors. In 1958, the launch of the Explorer rocket ushered in a new age of surveying, one that relied on satellites. This was the first step in what would become the Global Positioning System, or GPS. Over the course of 3 decades, GPS technology went from rare to commonplace. Today, the surveyors use GPS in a wide variety of applications: in the air, on land, and on the sea. Surveyors are even using GPS to create state-of-the-art runway charts. These charts will make it possible for pilots to land more safely, even when they have zero visibility. GPS is only one part of the new electronic approach to chart making. New technology has also transformed tide data collection. Today's tide stations use acoustic sensors to compute the water height to millimeter accuracy. An automated network of more than 200 tide gauges known as the National Water Level Observation Network continually transmits an ocean of data to users via the internet. Another of today's cutting-edge technologies is called multi-beam sonar. Multi-beam sonar systems send out acoustic signals called pings. To calculate distance, the system measures the time it takes for the ping to travel from the transmitter on the boat to the bottom and back.
Chief, I've got something for you to look at here. Okay. We seem to have an obstruction here right below the bridge. Looks to be about 3 meters.
The data collected by the multi-beam sonar becomes the basis for a three-dimensional map of the seafloor. Anomalies seen in 3D jump out and are evaluated by the survey team.
Just outside the channel, watered up at 26 feet. This would be a danger to navigation. This needs to have a D-time report sent out today so they can get out and publish community.
Okay, I'll do that today, sir.
Very well.
Today, U.S. ports receive more than 22,000 visits a year from ocean-going container ship. 2/3 of all the goods moving in and out of the United States travel by sea, accounting for $500 billion worth of trade annually. Ships are built to maximize volume. 150 years ago, a cargo ship may have only needed 10 feet of clearance from the seafloor. Today, a container ship draws 5 times that. The margin between a bridge above and a rock below can be very, very narrow. Through the internet and telephone, a ship's pilot can get instant information about actual weather and water conditions, rather than having to rely on predictions.
In Captain House 1,000 yards to go, and if we can come right 1 degree.
In addition to paper charts, they can use electronic charts that show exactly where a ship is at any given moment. All these tools can make the difference between smooth sailing and a shipwreck. But nowhere is the need for these tools more apparent than when a natural disaster strikes. In August 2005, Hurricane Katrina pummeled the Gulf Coast. The surveyors mobilized immediately. Tide information was used to predict which areas would be most affected and to plan for evacuations. Surveying planes took aerial photographs and posted them on the internet so that people could see if their homes were still standing. And when the storm winds died down, survey boats did emergency mapping to find hidden debris so that ships could once again move safely in and out of 13 major Gulf ports. These new charts were also used to help restore damaged fishing grounds, a key part of the Gulf economy. Surveyors are building new computer models of hurricane-prone areas, not just of New Orleans, but any part of the country that could be affected by extreme weather. Detailed analysis of the impact of storms can lead to better planning, saving property, and saving lives. From the first paper chart of New York Harbor published in 1845 to the 3D charts of tomorrow, the surveyor's pursuit of precision serves one purpose: to make navigation safer. All told, their achievements are staggering. 100 million charts, 9,000 tide and current stations, 95,000 miles of shoreline mapped, and a survey network of more than 1.5 million control points. Today, the ongoing work of the surveyors touches every aspect of our daily lives, protecting millions of lives, billions of dollars in property, and irreplaceable natural resources.
Level 7, 8, 2, 6, 6, 5. Relax.
Jefferson's mission continues, deepening our knowledge of the continent we live on and of the ocean that sustains us.